Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us, whether that be in Minnesota, Wisconsin, California, Idaho, wherever it is, we just want to say thank you for journeying with us. For many of you, you have been on this journey through the book of Genesis, and it has taken well over a year. And truth be told, we have quite a few more chapters to go, but I've had so many of you reach out and say, look, this is incredible. I have never delved this deep into a book of the Bible before. And I want to say that for these people who wrote this, compiled it, this is the norm, right? They took this book, this compilation of stories, poems, all of it, they took it very seriously. And so here at Ethos, that's exactly what we do. We spend a great amount of time looking at all the different interpretations we can. We ask questions of who the author was, what the audience was going through at the time. We ask questions of words, phrases, all of it. We look at the context, everything we can in order to find really responsible understandings. And only then do we turn and find relevant information for today. So that's what we do every single week because we think it's important. I would argue the Bible, now more than ever, is so important. There's so much beauty here if we're willing to put the difficult work, the time in. And so, welcome to Ethos. And so, today we're going to continue doing what we've been doing for the last year and a half, moving through this awesome compilation called Genesis, the book of origins, right? And a reminder to everyone listening, we know again, this is not a history book, right? This was not written to give us perfect specific times, dates, names. That was never the point. They were not writing history back then. No tribe was. What they were doing is they were compiling all of their ancient stories, right? Their big mythic stories. They were writing messages from kings to their people. They were writing great poetry. They were doing all of this. And so 587 BC, that's where we get our start. That's where we find Torah is compiled. And so in 587 BC, they are basically, their temple, everything is destroyed, and they're marched hundreds of miles on foot to Babylon. And so you've heard this before. Again, they're asking the question, are we going to take on Babylon, Babylonian gods, Babylonian rituals, Babylonian traditions, their gods, or are we going to hold on to what it means to be a Jew, to be monotheistic, to remember our traditions, to remember grandma's recipe, right? That's what they're asking themselves. And so they decided we are going to keep Jewish kosher, right? So they compile all their stories into what we know as Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And now we have this beautiful gift to the world, right? And so Torah, you have to understand, whenever a Jewish rabbi would approach this piece, they would always approach it with awe and reverence, but they always saw their tribe, the Hebrews, in the story. And so when you read about Moses, for most of them, it wasn't literally Moses, the character, that caught their attention. It was that they saw themselves in Moses. Moses was a representation of what Israel was going through. Israel wandering in the desert, Israel having to learn and unlearn certain things. Every major messianic archetype is going to be another reminder of Israel miniaturized through these tellings. And so as we read through, always remember, ask the question, where do I find Israel in this story? And so we're going to look at Genesis chapter 31, and we're going to finish off this chapter. We're going to go 29 through 55. Now, that's a doozy. That is a big chunk. And so what I want to do with you today, I'm going to read through it, and I'm going to do what a rabbi, again, would typically do. I'm just going to point out certain references, certain verses and phrases that might stand out here. And I'm even going to reference a more, I would say, a more modern rabbinical tradition that's picked up in the last 100 years, and it's more of a feminist one. So I'm even going to introduce you to one of those, and it should be kind of interesting. So verse by verse, it's going to be good. Reminder again, we have these two brothers, right? These have been the center of where we've been for the last couple chapters. We have Jacob and Esau. And again, you know this, Jacob and Esau represent two parts of Israel. the higher self and the lower self. And so a reminder, this quote, the twins are really the beautiful light and darkness that we Jews embody from day to day. Whichever side we feed is the side that will either waste the blessing of life or multiply it. So again, Jacob has been on this journey. Jacob is learning how to multiply the blessings, right? So again, like think about that. It's beautiful to consider. Israel sees themselves in the story, right? So they're learning. We as Israel, as Jacob, we have been through it, right? We have been stuck in Laban's, under Laban's thumb. And he has been prospering because of us, right? Consider Egypt captivity, Babylonian captivity, Roman captivity. These empires are prospering because of the work we're doing, right? As far as Israel. And so, again, they're learning, they're unlearning, they're going through it. And the question, of course, for Jacob is, how am I going to multiply the blessings? How will I accept the promise that God has given me? That's the story. It's not a story about Jacob. It's a story about Israel. And really, it's a story about you and me. There's a deeper story. There are layers and layers to this. And it's so fun to unwrap it. So let's delve in. Here we go. Verse 29, this is Laban he's caught up to Jacob after Jacob left, right? He left real early, so Laban couldn't find him, and Laban is caught up to him now. And so he says, I have the power, Jacob, to inflict harm upon you. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, beware of speaking with Jacob, either good or bad. But now you have gone away, for you longed for your father's home. But why have you stolen my gods? Jacob replied, and he said to Laban, because I was afraid, because I said, lest you steal your daughters from me. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our brothers, recognize for yourself what is with me, and take it for yourself. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the idols, right? So Laban entered Jacob's tents, and Leah's tent, and the tents of the two handmaids, but he did not find them. And he had come out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. But Rachel had taken the teraphim, the idol, the house idol, right, and placed them into the camel's saddle, and sat upon them. So Laban felt about the entire tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let my lord not be annoyed, for I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the teraphim, again, the idols of the house. And Jacob was annoyed, and he quarreled with Laban, and he said to Laban, what is my transgression? Right? What are you doing here? Why are you here basically ready to attack me? Right? And he says, what is my sin that you have pursued me? For you have felt about all my things. What you found of all of the utensils in the house? Put it here, in the presence of my kinsmen and your kinsmen. Let them decide between the two of us. Already 20 years I have been with you, and your ewes and you have goats have not aborted, neither have I eaten the rams of your flocks. I've not brought home to you anything torn by any of the animals would suffer its loss. From my hand you would demand it, what was stolen by day and what was stolen at night. I was in the field by day when the heat consumed me, and the frost at night, and my sleep wandered from my eyes. Basically, like, I lost sleep for you, Laban. I worked for you, Laban. This is 20 years that I've spent in your house. I served you 14 years for your two daughters, and 6 years for your animals, and you changed my wages 10 times. Had not the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and fear of Isaac, been for me, you would now have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, and he reproved you last night. Woo, right? These are heavy words. Laban answered and said to Jacob, my daughters are my daughters, and the sons are my sons, and the animals are my animals, and all that you see is mine. Now, what would I do these daughters of mine today, or to their children whom they have borne? So now come, let us form a covenant, you and I, and may he be a witness between me and you. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a monument. And Jacob said to the kinsmen, gather stones, and they took stones and made a pile, and they ate there by the pile. And Laban called it Yeger Sahudatha, but Jacob called it Galed. And Laban said, this pile is a witness between me and you today. Therefore he called it Galed too. And Mitzpah, because he said, may the Lord look between me and you when we are hidden from each other. The phrase, when we cannot see each other's face. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take wives in addition to my daughters when no one is with us, behold, God is a witness between me and you. And Laban said to Jacob, behold this pile, and behold this monument which I have cast between me and you. This pile is a witness, and this monument is a witness, that I will not pass this pile to go to you, and that you shall not pass this pile and this monument to come to me to do harm. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor judge between us, the God of their father. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Almost there. And Jacob slaughtered a slaughtering on the mountain, and he invited his friends to eat the meal. And he ate bread and lodged on the mountain. Right? This was a lot. This was a lot of reading today. We're going to move through it, though. I promise it's going to be good. So here we go. Let's delve in. Verse 29, notice this. I have the power to inflict harm upon you, but the God of your fathers spoke to me last night. Remember the stories, right? This is a story that's going to jog their memory. They know the story of Moses better than any story. And so when they hear this again, Laban is the character of Pharaoh. They pick this up immediately. The two, they represent the two very same things, right? These are empires. This is captivity. They're benefiting from extorting Moses and Jacob. They are the Hebrew people, right? So immediately they're picking up on this. They basically, the Israelites are gone, right? Furthermore, the Israelites acted on Moses' word and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. This is that moment when Egypt leaves with all the plunder, right? They get to take all that stuff. This is Jacob again. Pharaoh chases them. Laban does the same thing. You're making all the connections. And so Pharaoh allows Jacob to leave. The God of Israel, though, here's the cool thing about this verse. One that I've seen rabbinical tradition after rabbinical tradition over it. Here's the beautiful thing here. God doesn't just speak to the hero in the story. God also speaks to the villain. Powerful? Yeah. God doesn't just connect with the heroes, the just. He connects with the unjust. I think that's a really powerful thing. It's powerful when we're so quick to victimize, demonize others, right? God can even speak to them. I think that's a really powerful thing to remember, especially when there's a person in my life I just can't stand, right? God speaks to even the unjust. He can even speak, again, this God even speaks, finds a way to let the presence of the divine be known even to Pharaoh, even to Laban. That is so good. Let's keep going. When the news reached Nineveh, I love this reminder in Jonas 3. When the news reached Nineveh, this king rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. This is another reminder again, God speaks to the unjust. And look what happens in this verse in Jonah. Because again, I thought about this when I was thinking of God speaking to the unjust. In this moment, even the king of Nineveh, which is like the worst of the worst empires, right? They made Egypt, Assyria, Babylon look like flower children, right? Nineveh was bad news. Nineveh was bad, right? This was the beginnings of Babylon. And so even this king, guided by the divine, learns to show compassion and mercy. And so no one is beyond the divine's voice. And what a cool picture for these people stuck in Babylonian captivity. No one is beyond the divine's voice. The divine can even reach our enemies. Really, really beautiful. All right, so verse 30. He says, who has stolen my goods? Right? He doesn't know. But Laban knows his gods have been taken. But here's the thing, Jacob doesn't. Jacob replies, because I was afraid, because I said, lest you steal your daughters from me. Jacob's unaware. He has no idea. And so again, it's interesting here. He's aware of what's going on. He's being careful. And notice that in verse 32, 33, he's saying, look, if you find anything, that's on those people. He has no idea that his wife has taken it, right? But he also knows Laban is very shrewd. And so he's being careful here. Yes, he may have forgiven Laban, but he hasn't forgotten. And so he's got to be careful. And this is why verse 34 and 35 is so fascinating to me. Let me show you here. Verse 34, but Rachel had taken the teraphim. And again, this is basically like a collection of idols, right? These are house idols that the main master of the house, the patriarch of the house, would pray to for his family. Yeah, that's the idea here. And this is what Rachel steals. And so Rachel had taken these idols and placed them into the camel's saddle, sits upon them. So Laban felt about the entire tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let my lord not be annoyed, for I cannot rise before you, for the way of a woman is upon me. The way of the woman, this is basically saying the time of my menstrual cycle is happening. Right? I cannot get off this thing. I have to stay on the horse or the camel. Right? Really interesting. But here's the thing. Most of us miss it. But years and years, I would say this is probably a 500 year new kind of tradition, but it's one where the feminine voice begins to speak up. And it's really interesting. Judaism is mainly driven by like a masculine voice as far as rabbinical voices go. But this interpretation has found its way. Even in the beginning of like first century, you find little pieces of it, but it grew and grew and grew. And so the last couple hundred years, you find more and more rabbis that are beginning to say, you know what? There's an interesting feminist interpretation here. And when I say feminist, I'm not meaning like bra burning, whatever. I'm saying there is something interesting about the feminine voice and feminine power and balance and equality here that's really worth bringing up. And so notice this, the voice of Rachel. This was a Genesis study on like feminism in this book. And so notice this, what they say about Rachel. I really like this. Rachel steals the teraphim, again, the idols, because her status as a woman in a patriarchal household prevents her from confronting her father with her own grievances about her rightful inheritance. Therefore, she goes about getting justice from her father through devious and extra legal means. Basically, when power has been taken from you, when you have no power, how do you balance the scale? Martin Luther King Jr., think about this one. No power, right? You have to find a way, though, to find justice, to find balance. What did he do? Peaceful protests, right? Finding a way to show the world, look, when racism is the norm, it creates victims. And look, we will show you what victims look like. We'll peacefully protest. We'll take on your violence. And when we do, you will see victims, and your heart will side with us. Right? It's a beautiful picture. And this is what, again, the feminist critiques are saying about Rachel. She's doing what she can do, and she's having to be a bit tricky about it, right? She's having to think through in a much, much deeper way in order to take back some of that power. Here's another quote from this study, which I really loved. It was long. I spent a lot of time just finding these, but I think they're worth it. Notice this. In telling her father that she cannot rise before him because the way of the woman is upon her, Rachel is speaking two languages simultaneously. And I think you've done this before, right? You've seen people do this. When you can play with language a little bit, right? You are outsmarting your opponent. You're using different levels of language. It could mean this, but it could also mean this, right? And so Laban hears Rachel as saying she cannot honor him by standing because she's menstruating. But Rachel's speech also reads as a complaint that she has no forum for rising before her father and pleading her case for inheritance. The social way of women constrains the possibilities for speech, advocacy, and direct action. Again, it's a brilliant move. Whether this is really what was happening or not, it's a brilliant interpretation, isn't it? She steals not only the teraphim, right, but also the language that's been used on her, right, to define her as a woman, to limit her access to culture and law. She uses a double meaning here. And most Jewish people, they would have had a chuckle at this, right? She outsmarts her cunning father. She outsmarts the fox, right? She outsmarts the Pharaoh character. She does it. And it reminds me, Matthew 10, Jesus says, "Behold, I send forth as sheep in the midst of wolves." Right? Again, the weak around the powerful. Yet, here's the advice he gives, and I think it's so good. "Be ye therefore wise as serpents, harmless as doves." This is exactly what she does. She outsmarts her enemy by being innocent, not harming them, but doing the thing in a cheeky way, right? She goes the extra mile to do the thing, but she does it in a way that it's not really hurting someone. Right? And this is why, again, Jesus' advice, go the extra mile when the soldier says, take my bags, right? Turn the other cheek. The idea here, she follows the Jacob example. Jesus is quoting the Jacob example. It's really, really beautiful. Let's keep moving. We're only on verse 37. Let's keep moving. For you have felt about my things. Jacob is saying, look, I'm done with you looking around, right? I've got nothing here. He says, what have you found of all the utensils in your house, right? You're looking everywhere. Are you going to look through your utensils too? You think I stole those too, your forks and knives? Put it here in the presence of my kinsmen and your kinsmen, and let them decide between us. Basically, in Middle Eastern culture, when you had an issue with someone and you just could not solve it, you would bring in a mediator. Because sometimes you need a witness when there's conflict, right? Sometimes you need the voice to hear the different sides and help both through it, right? Because we all have these blinders. And so you sometimes need a mediating voice. And so this is exactly what Jacob calls on. And in that culture, when someone called on the mediator would show up. And the other person that you are at odds with must accept that there is a need for a mediator. And that's what he does. And so verse 38, 39, already 20 years I've been with you, and your ewes, basically he goes through the whole list. I've done this and this for you, right? I've never taken anything from you. I've always done my very best to work hard for you. I worked so many years for your daughters, 6 extra years for the animals, right? I've done all of this. And so this is really a beautiful testament to Israel as a nation in captivity. Like, think about this. Rather than responding to your enemies, your captors, in violence, eye for an eye, they chose to live peacefully. Right? Like, that's so beautiful. The story of Joseph, right? He finds a way for his enemies to prosper. Right? It's what they do. They help their captors. There was nothing bad that Laban or Egypt or Babylon could say of them, because everywhere they went, they brought life. Isn't that so beautiful? Yes, you're at odds with your boss. And yes, your boss is annoying, and maybe they're unjust with you, right? They're unjust with you. But if we learn anything from the Hebrews, it's that you put in the work. You do the very best you can. And at the end of the day, you have not given up anything. They may be evil captors. They may be cunning Labans. But at the end of the day, you have no regrets. You've done the very best you could. I love this idea. Let's keep moving on. 42. God has seen my affliction and my toil and my hands, and he reproved you last night. Right? God reminded you. Again, God spoke to my enemies. There was a sense of guilt you experienced for what you did to me and my people. And when you got that, the divine spoke to you. And hopefully when the divine speaks to you, you'll listen. Yeah, there's more. 42, 43. The daughters are my daughters. Here's Laban's response. And the sons are my sons, and the animals are my animals. Now, what would I do to these daughters of mine today? Or to their children, whom they have borne? Again, Laban is basically doing something here. He's basically saying, I wouldn't let anything happen to my daughters. I wouldn't let anything happen to my sons, which of course we know is not true, right? Laban's made Jacob and his people suffer, right? Laban, though, he's trying to put on the happy face. Oh, I would never have hurt you, right? I was going to catch up to you and we're going to have tea, right? No, that's not what was going to happen, right? Laban was mad. He was out for blood until God said, no, 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 don't touch, right? Don't touch. So now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and may he be a witness before me and you. Covenant. Let's make a promise, right? Let's make a promise, one that others are going to see. But here's the problem. Jacob has made covenants with Laban before, hasn't he? Yeah, he's been tricked though. So the question is, what's going to be different in this story? So what would cause him not to go back on his word like he did so many times in the past? Right? Because that could easily happen. Laban is a tricky bugger, right? How do we do it? Well, here's what Jacob says. He says, I'm going to build an altar. We're going to build a monument. We're going to build a monument. We're going to build this statue here to remind our people of this is where we've been, right? And this is where we're going. And it may not be a great thing. It may be a southern general, right? I don't know. But this is a monument. This is where we were. This is a reminder. This is what our country looked like when it was divided, and it wasn't good. Maybe this idea that half of our country has right now, that we need a civil divorce, maybe that's actually not a good thing, right? People die when there is civil unrest with two different parties breaking up and countries dividing. Maybe that isn't a good thing. Maybe we should consider our history. I don't know. Maybe. But the monuments are set up there to remind the people of their history, of their stories, of their past. And so Jacob built a monument, a way in which his people could look back and judge whether he lived Torah or not. Jacob chose to make an everlasting legacy that day. I thought that was a really cool response there from one of my favorite rabbis. Jacob built a monument. And this, again, is the whole point of Torah, right? Torah is compiled as a monument to the people to remind them this is who we are, this is where we're going. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget the promises made. Don't forget the things, the values we stood up for. Don't forget Israel, right? So good. It goes further. Verse 49, this is one of my favorite things I found in this whole study, and I just love to share it. And Laban called it, this monument, Yegor Sehadutha. And Jacob called it Galed. Now notice this, they're calling it two different things. One could argue, and there are different interpretations that say, well, Laban came from this culture that had monotheistic gods, different understandings, and Jacob came from this understanding, more Jewish, Hebrew. But they're actually Hebrew words, right? And so there's two different words here, and they actually mean something really interesting. Let me show you at this slide. There are two ways, again, they're really talking about Torah, right? They're talking about Torah. All the interpretations say this monument is really a response to how Hebrews would view Torah. And so for Laban, Torah, right? Yegar Sehaduthu, it's always a fun word to try to pronounce. This literally means, in response to the stones, looking at the stones, what people see with their eyes. Come on. Yeah. And Galed, Jacob, what people felt with their hearts and their hands. So when Laban looks at the monument, he sees with his eyes a reminder. When Jacob looks at the monument, there's something deeper happening. His heart is stirred. He doesn't just see the narrative. He feels it. He feels the good, the bad, the ugly, the ebb, the flow, right? He has a deep, deep connection. Think about what the Hebrews are saying about Torah. It's so good. No wonder Christians today, and I include everybody, right? Most people in America that call themselves Christians, you can see with your eyes, but unless we've traveled the journey as Jews, right? Unless we speak the words, we understand the words, we live the customs, the rituals, the traditions, we will never feel with our hearts and our hands. So good, right? This is what Jacob is saying. The monument to me means this. The monument to Laban means this. Rashi says this about this whole experience. We Jews side with Jacob. Torah is not factual history, but felt experiences that cause our hearts to weep and sing. Right? No wonder when rabbis would bring out the scrolls of Torah, people would weep and they'd sing. Right? When a pastor today pulls out that pretty looking book and opens it, people are not weeping, singing. Some people are sad because they don't want to hear it, right? But there was so much joy because they knew this is our story. We feel it with our hearts. Can you imagine if when you picked up that book, that compilation we call the Bible, when you read through the stories of Jesus, your heart, you felt it in your heart, not just saw it with your eyes, you felt it with your heart because it made that much of a connection. Wow, right? That is so heavy. It continues, verse 50. This pile is a witness between me and you today. Therefore, he called it Galed. Notice that Laban, he sees Jacob experience it. And he can't help but want to experience it too. He shifts his understanding of the moment. And again, most rabbis would say of understanding Torah. Because here's the thing. Sometimes to appreciate a thing, you have to see someone else who appreciates it more experience it. Right? Sometimes when you see someone else experience the thing, it takes on a whole new meaning. And in this moment, I love this moment so much. Laban sees Jacob. Look at the monument. He sees him, and Jacob is thinking about those years of turmoil and struggle, all for these two women that he loves, for his family, for this whole livelihood, the livestock, all of it. He's seen Jacob experience it and appreciate it, and he says, it's not a history book. This is a shared narrative experience that my son-in-law has gone through. It is Galed. It's Galed. Right? So good. So good. One of my favorite moments in Torah study so far in Genesis. It just rocked me when I thought about that today. It just hit me to the core. Verse 49. And Mitzpah, because he said, may the Lord look between me and you when we are hidden from each other. I like this idea. When we struggle to understand each other, let us turn to our felt stories, the narratives that bring us together, the moments where our hearts connect with something. Let those be the things that bring us together. And I think about Ukraine and Russia right now. Right? I have so many people, I see people posting flags on their social media and all that. That's great. Half of the people, I don't know if they could find Ukraine, the truth be told, or Russia for that matter, on a map. But here's something interesting. I have a friend who has family in Ukraine, and he has been struggling with this whole thing, Ukraine and Russia, Russia invading. And he said something interesting. He said, you know what, my heart's breaking because my family is on both sides. He said, I'm watching them kill each other. Right? There are Ukrainian soldiers taking the lives of Russians and Russians taking the lives of Ukrainians. And he said this to me, and I said, I need to quote you on this. He said this, we have more in common than we have differences. We are brothers. We've just forgotten our stories, forgotten our history. I don't mourn for the crooked politicians on either side. I mourn for the people who have chosen to fight one another. War. Right? We've forgotten our stories. And when I read that, I thought, it's Jacob and it's Laban, right? It's that moment. What a powerful moment. Verse 53. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor. Notice this. Notice this one. There's the God of Abraham, the one we know, right? The one that the Hebrews talk about. But then why does Laban bring up his God? Here's the interesting thing about this. It's interesting that they swear on both gods, right? The Hebrews at this point in time, while they worship one God, they did believe in other gods. Most people don't realize that. They bring up the other gods. Don't worship other gods. Right there, that's enough for an understanding of, oh, they were monotheistic in worship, but they had the idea that there were other gods. Worship only this one God, right? And so they choose, though, in this moment to respect both cultures and the gods they worship. They respect that they have different views. That's the idea here. They make an agreement, and it starts with mutual respect for each other's stories, right? The Hebrews stories, the Hebrews gods are going to be different than Nahor's God, or the Nahor stories, right? The culture and the gods that Laban holds dear. But there's a mutual respect for one another. And Jacob slaughtered a slaughtering on the mountain, and he invited his friends to eat a meal, and they ate and lodged on the mountain. The understanding is here that Jacob sacrifices, and the sacrifices are given. Laban gives some to his God, Jacob gives some to his God. It's such an interesting perspective. It's one that we don't often realize. And then here's the kicker. Here's what you may not know. At the end, if you're a Jew, you don't end this chapter there at verse 54. You end it with this one, verse 55. The American translations, we actually end it on 54, verse 54, and we go into chapter 31 and we make this verse 1. The reason behind this is really fascinating. For the Hebrews, they did not feel the story was finished. They felt like the story should end with Laban reconciling. You should not end the argument. The sun shouldn't go down, right? You shouldn't leave the presence of your enemy before reconciling fully. That's a very Middle Eastern idea, right? And so when respect is given, when two parties come together, seeking peace, when they take time to remember their shared stories, there's peace in the morning, right? So good. Notice this. Laban arose early in the morning, kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. And Laban went and returned to his place. There is peace in the morning when we come to our enemies seeking peace. Beautiful, right? What a time to be reading this. Really, really good. I hope you enjoyed that. That was so fun for me. So I started thinking now that we've kind of moved through our interpretive moments, 8 minutes worth. What do we do for like a take it home moment? I thought about this one. How do I make peace with my enemies? I am not always very good at this. I'm not always very good with this. Sometimes people do me wrong, and in the past I've wanted to like get back, right? Eye for an eye. It just takes over sometimes, right? I feed the wolf instead of the lamb. It happens. And so I've been reading a bunch of different books on this. And here's a couple ideas that I wanted to share with you that I thought, this is really good. Brene Brown is actually the one that shares some of these ideas. And there's other writers now who have written about this. So let me share with you some. Number one, apologize. Have you done anything in the past that hurt the other person? Have you ever apologized for it, right? A simple apology given with sincerity of heart, it can go a long way. Start with an apology. Number two, she says, say thanks. This one shook me a little bit. I was like, wait, what? Why do I say thanks? Keep an eye open for like little things that the person does that you can appreciate, right? Instead of making the person a villain, look for things that you can find that are positive. So maybe they've done something for years, you've never acknowledged it. Thank them for these actions. Be sure to mention like precisely what it is you appreciate about those moments. Say thanks. Number three, have a conversation. This is so hard sometimes though, isn't it? Have a conversation. Schedule time to find out what's important to the other person and reveal that you actually care about them, right? Speak genuinely, listen openly. That's the idea here. Have a conversation. Number four, turn toward them. This is a very Hebraic idea. Actually turn fully your attention to them. Like every micro intention you have with them is an opportunity to make small improvements in the relationship. Every one of them, turn toward them. Your body posture, everything, turn toward them. Be for them, not against them. Number 5, be aware of their pet peeves. This is a big one. Everyone has a pet peeve, so this person likely has one related to you. So find out what it is, right? If it's something you're doing, you know they hate it, but you kind of do it just to get on their nerves, just stop. It's building a wall. It's not helping the relationship. And then lastly, acknowledge changes they've made, right? If you've started to change how you interact with that other person, quite possible they will change how they behave toward you. And so when they do something positive, however small, learn to appreciate it. I love those 6 pieces of advice. Try them this week. See how it goes. Let me know how it goes. I'd love to hear from you. So everyone, as always, if you'd like to continue working with us, helping us share this really great, these great messages, this great research that we do, please consider donating. Ethos-Church.org/donate. This is a tax-deductible donation. So please consider donating there. As always, if you want to do online discussion groups with us, please let us know. Ethos Living Rooms, it's a really powerful place. And hit that subscribe button. Share these YouTube videos. We'd love to grow the YouTube channel as well as everything else grows. The podcast, Faith Undone, it's back. It's doing well. Join us on any of these platforms. We are having so much fun. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to see you next week as we step into the next chapter. Take care. See ya. Bye.